Dear friends, good afternoon. I would like to thank Legal Era for inviting me to be a keynote speaker in this prestigious event, and my special thanks to Akriti. I would like to start my speech with a quote from Justice Frankfurter. He says, though my business throughout my professional life has been with statute, I come to you empty handed. I bring no answers. I suspect the answer to the problems of an art or in its exercise. This quote is apropos today, in as much as one expects the tax law, even other law, to be specific, certain, and clear, but as most of us would have seen, that is not the case. I have found in my experience that often we know the law to be one, while in practice we face a completely different animal. Even though our country has introduced this goods and services tax and we have moved away from this cascading effect of taxation, we have a lot of ground to cover. I believe this would be a good forum to consider certain issues concerning the administration of tax laws, which are often faced by businesses and their impact on the businesses. While there would be many such issues, given the consideration of time, I would limit this address to two broad topics, which I feel are relevant for the times. The first being that of an investigation and summons by tax officials, and the second of unjust enrichment. I shall begin with the former topic, that is investigation and summons by tax officials. Powers of the authorities inquiring or investigating into any tax issues are undefined. It is generally accepted that they do have the power to summon individuals to depose or produce documents, conduct search and seizures, and in appropriate cases, arrest the individuals. For instance, Section 14 of the Central Excise Act and Section 108 of the Customs Act empower the authorities under the respective enactments to issue summons to depose and also to produce documents. The power of the authorities to issue summons under these sections are circumscribed by two factors. One, the summons could be issued by the jurisdictional officers to produce documents or appear before that officer in his jurisdiction. And the second one is that the officer should have reasons to believe that the person summoned has some information to help in the investigation or has some documents which are relevant for the purpose of this investigation. More often than not, one would see compliance of these factors. However, in certain instances, the power to investigate suspected tax evasion matters are handled by officers from outside jurisdictions in which the assessee has place of business. In National Building Construction Company's case, the Delhi High Court has deprecated the practice of summoning senior officers and managing directors of the assessee, threatening prosecution, and also advised that only where documents are required, the summons should specify the required documents and the only protection of those documents, and the personal appearance of these officers should not be insisted upon. In this case, the court has accepted that the officers outside the jurisdiction also could have jurisdiction to start the inquiry and conduct the investigation. It did not address the issue of whether the assessee could be summoned to appear in a jurisdiction outside his place of business. In similar circumstances, it is relevant to note that Supreme Court has held that the assessee has a right to claim that he should be assessed within his territorial jurisdiction, and several cases have dealt with these aspects. We may have lost sight of these judgments in the course of time, but they are valuable in protecting the rights of the assessee. While it can easily be acknowledged that there may be requirements such as ease of administration, convenience of the authorities, centralization, lack of manpower, etc., and the authorities attempt to ease their task should not burdened the assessee with additional obligations that were not contemplated under the statute. An officer outside the assessee's jurisdiction can always visit the assessee's jurisdiction and inspect the documents and conduct the inquiry. The other troublesome factor we face is the summons issued by the authorities compelling the person summoned to make a statement. For all practical purposes, it is tantamount to forcing a person to be a witness against himself. And the courts have held in many cases, including Nuraga, that such a compulsion would violate the constitutional guarantee given to that person, and such a statement is not admissible in evidence. This brings to mind the Hollywood movies where some daring officer of FBI or NIPD would crash into some abandoned warehouse to burst a drug shop or arrest some people after a dramatic chase. And once they catch the person, that common scene is shown, where the officer is handcuffing the person and reading the Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent and refuse to answer questions. Anything you say may be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to consult an attorney before speaking to the police and to have an attorney present during questioning now or in the future. The Miranda warning became popular because of all these movie scenes. In USA, the famous case of Miranda versus Arizona laid out the standards for recording statements from suspects. An interesting trivia is that the spirit of this constitutional has its roots in common law, emerging from the trial of John Lilburne, an English revolutionary politician. Such a protection is required in India and to safeguard the decency of an individual, which is guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution. In some cases, however, the courts in India have held that the presence of an advocate at the time of making an inquiry or recording the statement under Section 14 of the Central Excise Act or Section 108 of the Customs Act is not mandatory. But this position requires reconsideration in view of the latest decision of the Supreme Court in Tofen Singh, where the Supreme Court said these officers are also police officers and therefore any statement made to them will not be admissible in evidence. We can consider certain measures in this regard in order to protect the rights of the assessee at the time of summoning or requiring the people to record statements. The summons should specify the documents required to be submitted. It should be restricted to the documents the assessee is required to maintain under the relevant law, and personal appearance should not be insisted upon. If summons is issued for recording a statement of the assessee, the summons should specify the venue within assessee's jurisdiction and the time required for the assessee to be present. The summons should also specify that the assessee may, if he so desires, have an advocate present with him at the time of recording his statement. Assessee should be granted relief if any summons is issued to him without valid ground or if he is harassed by repeated notices and summons. These measures would go a long way in protecting the rights of the assessee at the time of ensuring a fair investigation. Now, I would like to move on to the next topic that I wish to address, which is unjust enrichment. We have certain restrictions on time, but I trust I have adequate time for this topic, and I shall address this very briefly. Under the existing understanding of unjust enrichment, which flows from the well-known judgment in Mafatlal Industries, the Supreme Court has dealt with the issue of unjust enrichment and upheld the validity of the amendment made to Section 11B of the Central Excise Act. I would urge you to consider the following and encourage discussions and debate on this subject so that we may all have the benefit of greater clarity on this subject. A few assumptions are intrinsic to the fabric of unjust enrichment. In the first instance, it is assumed that the assessee had collected the tax by including it in his price, which he would have collected it from the consumer. Therefore, the provisions dealing with the unjust enrichment put the burden on the assessee to prove that the tax was not passed on. In this context, I would like to draw your attention to the judgment of the Supreme Court in Hindustan Lever's case, in which the court has clearly acknowledged that there was no presumption that the tax was included in the price. In another case involving Tisco also, the Supreme Court had acknowledged that the trader may or may not pass on the tax for various reasons, such as competition. This would also be constitutionally invalid as retention of an illegally levied or collected tax offends Article 265 of the Constitution. It's interesting note that this article traces its roots to Magna Carta, which prescribe restrictions on the crown, stating that no tax should be levied without the authority of the parliament. The significance of this protection cannot be downplayed in as much as it has been recognized in one of the most important historical symbols of liberty and enshrined in our Constitution. The second assumption is that the tax was indeed passed on to the consumer. It would result in windfall gain to the assessee, and therefore it would be desirable that such amount be retained by the government. The contention on windfall gain has been raised and rejected by courts across the world in various jurisdictions. Particularly the courts in Canada, UK, Australia, and United States have rejected the contention on windfall gain and held that the assessee would be entitled to refund. The House of Lords specifically held that the money paid by a citizen to a public authority in the form of taxes or other levies paid pursuant to an ultra-virus demand is prima facie recoverable by citizen as a right. A related aspect for consideration is that the adjudication of tax matters appear to be inherently skewed. Let me explain this in little more detail. If the department wins the dispute, it recovers the tax along with interest and penalty. As an added bonus to the department, it also has an option to prosecute the assessee. The punitive nature of the interest, penalty, as well as prosecution are in the nature of double jeopardy, which might be considered to offend Article 22 of the Constitution, which provides that no person shall be prosecuted or punished for the same offense more than once. However, this aspect is a topic for an entire independent discussion in itself, which I would be happy to have another day. Coming back to the topic of inherent skewness of adjudication of tax matters, however, if the assessee wins the case, he is required to be content with the relief that he would not be asked to pay the tax in future. Any discussion on economic injustice in this context, as have been considered by few judgments, is redundant if the most significant aspect is not considered, that denying refund reduces the available capital in the hands of an entrepreneur or business. Because we all know that the taxes are paid out of the capital. If an illegally collected tax is not refunded, it reduces the capital available for expanding the business. There would be no remedy to the assessee for being put to the hardship of litigation. And with this, I will close my speech, and I again extend my gratitude for having this forum to throw out debate for extensive debates. And I hope this has given us some food for thought, and I hope to see some discussions on this jurisprudence and development in these lines in future. Thank you very much.